Mannes and Jason Rosenbaum from the St. Louis Beacon and Chris McDaniel from St. Louis Public Radio. Let's dive right in. We've got a lot to talk about. They just got back to work yesterday, correct?
On Wednesday.
On
correct.
Wednesday. And so we've got the governor asking for an expansion of Medicaid. We've got Republicans promising jobs. I'll open the floor here. What are you expecting in 2013 from this State House and Senate?
Well, probably more than you'll see in 2014 because that's a campaign year. And in campaign years, there's lots more caution. So usually during the odd year, right after they get elected, that's when everybody gets gutsy.
So they feel like they have a little more freedom to do what they want.
On both sides. Well, because in some cases they're coming off the election and they made campaign promises and they want to show they can deliver. That's why you're hearing a lot of this talk on the one side about the Medicaid expansion, but the Republican leaders of the legislature, and the legislature is overwhelming Republican, are committed to not bringing it up. They philosophically do not believe in the Medicaid expansion as
before we go,
correct.
just when you say overwhelmingly Republican, just so everybody's on the same page, if they stay together, they can override any veto the governor might.
There are currently 109 Republicans in the House and 24 in the Senate. And it's a different legislature than it was in 2006 or 2007 when the conflict was largely Republican versus Democrat, maybe similar to Congress. Now there are so many Republicans in the legislature. In the previous 2 years, much of the conflict, and not universally, was intra-party fighting between different factions of the Republican Party. And that's common in any supermajority. You see that in Illinois going on right now, that Democrats are fighting with each other over various issues. And one of the key things I think we're going to be looking for is whether Republicans can get along with each other, the conservatives, the moderates, the more pragmatic ones. And that could be a difference between a successful session and a non-successful session.
I mean, I guess they've got a lot. Well, go ahead, Chris.
Well, when there are that many people, it's hard to get them all voting in a specific block. But when we say that there are a lot of people talking about Medicaid, it is only from one side. It's only Democrats and it's only Governor Jay Nixon who's been talking about it. The Republicans are likely to not bring it up even in the session.
And just to make just so everyone understands what we're talking about, as part of what people like to call Obamacare, if the states can expand the number of people who are eligible for Medicaid, the federal government will pick up the tab for the first 3 years, and then
3 years.
3 years, and then eventually they'll pay about 90% of it.
Yeah.
So
Correct. So for the long haul, the state share would be small. Now, the Republican critics say that A, they don't believe the federal government's going to be able to continue paying all that, and B, as I mentioned before, they're philosophically opposed to it because they don't believe that government should have that strong of a role in the healthcare system anyway. The Missouri Hospital Association is among those that is in favor of the expansion. You've got some other proponents, including the governor, who talk about the number of jobs that will be created. He's talking about 24,000 jobs based on what the Hospital Association's figures. But as I said, the Republicans don't think that this is the way to go, and they think it will just suck up too much money, federal money, and then at least state money that they think could be used elsewhere.
And as Joe mentioned, when she talked about philosophical differences, a lot of the Republicans that now make up the Missouri Senate, many of them voted to make very drastic cuts to Medicaid in 2005. And
to the federal minimum.
Right.
Right, we're at the federal minimum.
And if Nixon and the hospital associations want to pass this, they're going to have to convince, maybe not all of them, but they're going to have to convince a lot of the people that made that decision in 2005 to do a complete about-face, which is why people who observe the process don't necessarily say it has no chance, but it's going to be a challenging task for that type of priority to go through.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about what Republicans are talking about.
Right.
They're talking about one of the things that House Speaker Tim Jones has been talking about is lowering income taxes. He's been talking about how he's very envious of the system that Kansas has. He said at the State of St. Louis last week that he doesn't necessarily want to emulate it, whole hog, but he wants something that resembles it.
Yeah, because Eric Schmidt and some other Republican senators.
State senator from Glendale.
Yes, he's proposing to phase out the state income tax for businesses within 5 years. Now that's about a $460 million cut in the state budget when it all goes through. But they're contending that this would bring in a lot of growth. They point to Kansas, which just got rid of their income taxes for everybody, period. Now, Kansas, though, is already looking at least in the short term, huge budget deficits. So there is some concern about whether or not they can really go through
All
with
of
that.
this under the umbrella that they're talking jobs. That's their.
Yeah, they're saying it this way. And then you've got the Democrats who aren't that keen on this, but they're saying at least they would have to come up with some other taxes, maybe like the internet sales tax or other things to kind of
because there's no
make up the difference.
The border between Kansas City and Missouri and Kansas isn't a river like in St. Louis. Basically, you can walk right by it. It's almost non-existent. So what people are saying, especially Republicans, are they have to do something to prevent businesses from walking over that border and going into Kansas.
As we wrap up this little first session here, are the Republicans are they kind of under the spotlight a little bit here? They have the supermajority. If nothing gets done, are they on the hook for anything that goes wrong now?
Well, again, this is 2013. You can have some failures in 2013 and you still got a year and a half before an election, so people tend to forget that.
Plus,
So,
the math isn't